Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Cyrus enters the Old City under the protection of May, whose secret identity as a watcher for the wild has finally been revealed. How will his story intertwine with the twisting tales already unfolding in Rene? Find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 8. Tangled Paths. Cyrus. The 5th day of winter. The dead of night. There was a lot bouncing around in my head as I followed May down into Rene, but first and foremost were the million different energies bouncing around in the city. I'd thought that the energy of the forest was busy, and it was definitely, but it had been busy in a sort of cohesive way. I kept coming back to the idea of music because, frankly, these energies seemed to be best described musically, or at least easiest to wrap your head around. And out in nature, every force, except for that gross oil, had all kind of been playing the same song, as it were, like a symphony. Wait, see, what was a symphony?
Like a group of people all playing music at the same time. Kind of like a big band.
Okay, and based on context clues, I'm gonna guess that a band is a small group of people all playing music at the same time?
Bingo, kid. Got it. I think.
Well, anyway, if the forests and all of its energy had been a symphony, then sitting in town, or walking down into it, was like listening to 50,000 people all whispering different songs at you at the same time. Sure, some people seemed to overlap, maybe even singing in the same key, but as a whole, the amalgam of it made zero sense and was entirely stressful. May, the watcher for the wild who was now watching over me, had noticed the change as soon as we'd gotten close, and was very kind and attentive. She wrapped my arm through hers and began to hum as we walked through the thinning woods towards the bare edge of a hill. There, she'd waved aside plants and undergrowth with a gesture and guided me underground. That muffled all the energy music a bit, but she'd still made sure to keep me close to her as we descended deeper into the city. She explained to me that the old city's noise could be disorienting for anyone, especially for someone not used to living in the city, but even so for the people who had lived there for dozens of years. That had made me feel a little bit better, but not much. And try as I might, I couldn't keep the fire's words from bouncing back into my head. I couldn't even walk into town without getting lightheaded and faint. So even as we exited the tunnel into a long hallway, I could hear him over and over again. Weak, pathetic, useless. Weak, pathetic, useless. Weak, pathetic.
Hey, champ. I just wanted to remind you that it's my job to shit talk you, okay? And in a much less degrading, more playful way. So just so you know, you shouldn't step on my toes with this self-hating shtick. Just keep to positive Cyrusisms. Is that okay?
I'm not trying to take over anything, I mumbled under my breath. The reason I'd mumbled was because we were still following behind May, and I hadn't exactly explained to her the whole I have a voice in my head that I talk to sometimes thing. I had figured that would come out later. But after quietly following her, she led us down the long hallway and finished up at an enormous, beautiful room, dimly lit with the curtains drawn. She led me inside and got me a glass of water, and then after quickly instructing me that I was to be quiet and be very careful, she disappeared again.
So, what do you think happens next?
I wasn't sure at that point. I sipped on the large cup of water that May had poured me and looked around the suite. For someone who was officially a watcher for the wild, I hadn't been sure what to expect. But from what I could tell, we were in the finest room of a massive, multi-layer building with hushed glowing gemstones and jewels lighting the hallways. Even the suite itself was separated into a massive common area, a study off to one side, a lofted, curtained bedroom to the other, a small changing and washing room from what it looked like, as well as a stunning balcony all surrounded on one side by floor-to-ceiling glass windows, still covered by curtains. Within the room, the furnishings were impeccable too, mostly carved from dark woods, though there were gems and jewels and gold and velvet inlaid into everything. And I mean everything, from the bar counter to the wine and liquor cabinets to the dining table and all of the walls and generous seating that scattered the room. It was weird. In some ways, it reminded me of Erethine's study, but only if you'd snuck in as much expensive material as possible without completely ruining the atmosphere. Maybe Watchers for the Wild all use the same interior designer? I took a sip of water. I was really getting tired of having all these questions and absolutely no answers. In another life, this would have been a really cool journey. I'd already seen towns I'd never seen before, come across 4 or 5 different cultures, counting Bram and his friends separate from the other crappy Eterans, and I'd seen things I couldn't even have imagined back home. But instead of sharing stories and joyfully celebrating a fun adventure, here I was, sipping water, chased by a murderous, emotionally abusive fire demon, and passed around like some interesting pet from wolf to wolf. It was a little demeaning.
Oh yeah, speaking of demeaning, don't forget the Sestran pirate lady. She was gonna turn you into a sex slave, remember?
I spit out my mouthful of water. Is that what she was gonna do? Wait, okay. People do that? The phrase sex slave elicited, well, a bunch of very scary things that I couldn't tell if I'd read about or heard about, but I certainly knew they were bad.
Well, she sure as hell wasn't gonna marry you, bud. What do you think was going on?
I curled up a little tighter on the couch. I don't like Edera, I said.
You would not be alone in that regard,
May said as she entered the room. I hadn't even noticed her reach the door. Maybe it was all the sounds of the city or the fact that I'd been distracted. Maybe she was just quiet? Without her wolf coat on, which she'd stored somewhere upstairs as soon as she dropped me off, she fit right into the room and walked with the effortless grace of, well, you guessed it, a wolf.
But still,
May said, as she made her way over towards the windows on the other side of me.
We must learn to live in a world where Edera, for now, is the king.
Now, one thing I did hear next was a tremendous snuffling inhale from outside the door, like someone had a really, really bad cold. And then there was a shout, and then in walked one of the most unsettling people I'd encountered on this entire continent. First of all, her body seemed to be actively trying to tear itself apart. I wasn't sure what that was about, because she seemed to be walking just as fine and confidently as any other human I'd bumped into on Edera, but it felt like if anything changed in a moment, she might, explode. The second thing I noticed was she triggered what felt like 2 very different animal instincts in me. She was very pretty, athletically built, probably an inch or 2 taller than me, long black hair that was sort of messy, and she had super cool black tattoos that I could partially see through the long-sleeve white shirt she had on. So on one hand, I was curious. She seemed super cool and interesting. She also made me want to curl up into a ball and hide. Something about the way she walked was powerful and predatory, sort of in the same animalistic way that May was, but May was an ancient warrior wolf spirit. This was just a regular human, or at least I thought. The reason I wasn't sure is because underneath all the crazy energy of her body trying to tear itself apart, her sense of being, her soundtrack kind of, to bring it back to music, was really, really confusing. It felt Eteran at times, sort of like Bram, and then it would go chaotic, then vibrant and natural and beautiful, and then it would just flicker out of existence. There were moments that all of a sudden my senses just sort of slipped right through her or off of her for brief, disorienting moments, making me totally forget where I was standing in the room. It was giving me a headache, worse than the one that I already had. And it was around then that I realized she was staring at me just as intently as I was staring at her. May was behind us at this point doing something. touching the glass with a glowing green hand that all of a sudden made the glass itself turn a deep, cloudy green. And so left alone, I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was freeze and wait for further instructions. The dark-haired girl wasn't so uncertain. So what, May? Can he talk? She asked. He just looks like like a scared puppy? Yes, he can talk, May responded. With a breath, she placed her hands on another of the glass windows, sending it slowly clouding up like the others. Quite a few languages, in fact. I'm sure he's just startled and listening to my instructions to not speak unless I speak to him first. Which is a good thing. He's been through quite a lot recently from what I hear, and it seems he has learned to follow directions. An introduction is in order, though. Cyrus, this is BC. BC? This is Cyrus. It's a pleasure to meet you, I said to BC, whose eyes immediately narrowed. Of all the languages, why did you pick that one? She asked. What? She stepped forward. Do you think you fucking know me? You think I'm one of them? I don't know. What did I do other than say hello? She stared at me, eyes still ablaze, but she didn't take another step forward. Are you kidding me, May? She asked, switching languages. You brought this kid in and the first thing he does is speak Edarin at me? The fucking disrespect. I am sure he meant nothing by it, May said, concentrating on the last glass window. He does not strike me as the rude type. I am sure it was just an honest mistake. I am so sorry, I said, switching to join their new language. I can barely tell what language I'm using sometimes, and I just learned all these new ones in the past few days, so I will absolutely try to be better. I promise that I did not mean any disrespect to you by speaking Edarin. I do not like them either. BC looked at me, and then over to May as the windows finished fogging up. That wasn't enough, though, and May also finished drawing all of the curtains, leaving us in low light. Okay, what's going on here, May? BC asked. What does this linguistically confusing, sad puppy have to do with anything? Why did you fog up all of the windows, and when are we going to get back to focusing on the matter at hand? You know, big threat, bigger than the Machine King that he's supposed to help us with, which I do not believe for a second. May returned towards us, then paused, headed over to the bar, and selected a large container, pouring it out into 3 glasses. Ruiz tea, she explained as she returned. Nothing alcoholic, but it'll calm your substances, BC, and Cyrus, it should help with a bit of your sensory overload. BC, could you please sit, have a glass? Or at least lean on this chair? I have a lot of things to explain, and I'd rather not raise my voice any more than I have to. I grabbed my cup from the table and retreated back to the couch, not wanting to get any closer to BC than I had to. BC did similar, grabbing her cup, flipping a chair backwards and sitting in it. Excellent, May said. BC was still staring at me. I believe it's time for some reintroductions. BC frowned at me, then at May, but nodded for her to continue. Cyrus, this is BC, one of the most dangerous women in Edera, and a longtime friend of mine, May said. It is up to her to determine exactly how much she wants to elaborate on that fact. I looked at BC. I understood why I had been so scared at first. She was not looking at me, but instead at May. So, we're just going around telling everybody? BC started. BC, before you continue, this is Cyrus, who may or may not be the last Valguardian. He is certainly the first Valguardian seen in Edera in several centuries, and he was dropped off tonight by some old allies of mine out in the wild. Now it was BC's turn for stunned silence. And May continued.
As Cyrus knows, it is only fair that I tell you as well, BC. I am not just a wild woman from the southern forests. I am one of the full moon's guard, the half-human, half-great wolf, ancient protectors of the forest, and one of the first lines of defense tasked with guarding against the return of Apostolis and the end of the world. Now that we have gotten over introductions, it is a pleasure to meet you both formally.
Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.